time for the Carver palaver.
Yes, has anyone else noticed that he's been piping up? He's been quite vocal recently. But he did say something quite sensible this week. In an interview about climate change, he suggested that costly green policies here in the UK are futile because our carbon emissions are dwarfed by countries like China. That is demonstrably the case. Leading by example is one thing, but no ULEZ scheme or heat pump rollout is going to have the slightest impact on the global temperature. I think that's quite obvious. It's quite amusing, actually, to see Blair, the great liberal internationalist, appear a little sceptical of the net zero drive. How unfashionable of him. But this week, he said something a little less sensible, too. Tony Blair said Brexit continues to fill him with a constant sadness. To be fair, it's hardly surprising he feels a little down in the dumps about it all. After all, it was his ambition to be President of Europe before the British people rudely took that opportunity away from him, wasn't it? Now it seems he has greater ambitions, though, to be the President of the world, or at least to craft a Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, in his image. But anyway, what annoyed me was his assertion that a future generation will take Britain back into the European Union. He seemed quite certain about that, as if it is Brexit voters that are stuck in the past. In my view, it's the likes of Tony Blair who are the ones who are stuck in the past, actually. He may be gutted that we've left the European Union, but the vast majority of us have accepted, if not welcomed wholeheartedly, the public's decision. Either way, it looks like he very much has the ear of Keir Starmer, and that can only mean trouble. So there we go. There's my thoughts on Tony Blair's interventions this week. Darren, what do you make of Tony Blair and the way he is asserting himself, one might say?
I think it's very clear that Tony Blair is going to have one hell of a lot of influence if the polls are correct and Sir Keir Starmer is in number 10. And I'm not sure that's especially a good thing, because he disagrees even with Benjamin Butterworth on climate change, on net zero. He agrees with me, Darren Grimes. So, you know, you're a fallen hero, but we'll get on to that in a second. Because he also is pushing these digital ID cards and things like that, and his institute's going really big on these things. And I say, who are his funders, right? That's one question that you always ask Reem Ibrahim. Well, who are Tony Blair's funders? Who's funding him to push all of these wacky, zany ideas?
Maybe his son.
Well, I mean, there are a whole host of people it could be. Are there firms that are set to make some cash out of digital ID cards? He was all for COVID passports and all these other things.
Well, does he not provide consultants to governments around the world?
600.
He has his fingers in many pies, our Tony.
He definitely does, and I wish he would keep his fingers out of the British pie, I'll tell you that much for free, because anything that man touches is poisoned, frankly.
In fairness to Sir Tony Blair, sorry, excuse me, I accidentally didn't include his entire title there.
One man's sir is another man's...
Princess? I don't know. Anyway, he's not only been influential on Keir Starmer's potential government, you know, the Labour shadow cabinet, he was also very influential on the Boris Johnson-led government during the COVID vaccine period, because, of course, it was Tony Blair's institute that came up with the idea of only administering half the vaccine so that you could administer more vaccines to more people more quickly. So, actually, he's not just influential on the left.
I only got half a vaccine.
Well,
the outrage.
It was a smaller dose that his advice was, that his institute's advice was, and it was actually followed. So, actually, he's managed to fashion himself as probably the most influential ex-Prime Minister that we've ever had.
And he was the most influential Prime Minister. You know, he won more votes than Margaret Thatcher. He's the most successful post-war Prime Minister at the ballot box. He ruled for 10 years.
It's electoral success that you're talking about, but actually...
You know, and the truth is that you look at when he was in charge, well, economic growth was higher, people's salaries were higher, the number of boats coming over was lower.
The tax burden was lower.
The tax burden was lower. The NHS waiting times were lower. He did a damn sight better job
Benjamin,
than the lot since
your political history and just history. You do know we then had a financial crash, and since then our economy has been quite stagnant, which is a real shame. But I'm not sure how Tony Blair would have manoeuvred us out of these tetchy waters.
Who had every single quarter of his premiership have economic growth. Can you imagine that right now? And so when you look at someone who managed to make tens of millions of people's lives better and safer, then I think that is someone we should take.
Unemployment was higher at the end of Tony Blair's government than under a Conservative government.
The top rate of tax was 40% in 2007.
Yeah, but unemployment has been higher at the end of every Labour government than compared to Conservative.
Unemployment went up after the financial crash, and it was higher under Gordon Brown than it is right now.
So at the end of the last Labour government, was unemployment higher or lower than it is?
At the end of Tony Blair, it was about the same as now, I suspect, because Tony Blair's premiership was the start of low unemployment
at the moment, but that's not necessarily a good thing economically. It's more as a result of the fact that we've got huge amounts of vacancies. The problem with Tony Blair is that he does, we talk about the nanny state measures. He banned cigarette smoking inside pubs, which killed off 12,000 pubs in England and Wales.
Right. Better than killing off 12,000 people.
Well, we can all agree that Tony Blair is a bad man.
We can't.
So, still ahead, though, the greatest